Hey, what's going on? This is the Body Punch Podcast. My name is Naz. It's so exciting when Conor McGregor fights. Whenever he fights, everyone turns into an MMA fan. It's fun. Everywhere you go, everybody's talking about the fight. It has a ripple effect as well. Whenever Conor fights, the next couple fights on the card and the ones that are coming up in the coming weeks have that ripple effect. No matter what the outcome is, whatever Conor McGregor fights, it's just great for the sport. Now, with this new Conor McGregor, who hasn't been talking as much as the old Conor McGregor, will he generate the same kind of hype? Will he generate the same kind of following that he had? That's one of the questions. The other question is Dustin Poirier ready to redeem himself after getting brutally KO'd in the first round against Conor McGregor, which was a masterclass in many dimensions of the sport. Conor was talking a lot at the time. Dustin Poirier was actually going back at him, and they were having these, it was really rough. I remember there was one press conference at the time where I think DC was there, Conor was there, and Poirier. And they were talking back and forth, just chirping at each other. That's where we got the infamous line of Conor McGregor saying that if Dustin Poirier got hit by a gust of wind, then he's doing the chicken dance. But now all media and everybody is talking about how both of these guys have evolved. They're different fighters. Let's talk about what people are saying the differences are now. First of all, Dustin Poirier was at 145 at the time. 145 was a brutal cut for him. It was tough in the sense that he was growing. He always felt like it always looked like he was bigger than everybody else. When it comes to his muscle, his height was always similar. I think he's about the same size as Conor McGregor, but the weight cut was just brutal for him. The other thing was that Dustin Poirier has been in this sport for a very long time. And I think after he evolved and went to 155, it just upgraded his whole game because he had the energy, because he had all of the skills, and now he has all of the knowledge mixed together. It creates for a really interesting fighter who is not ready to back down in any occasion. In all of the past fights that we've seen of his, he is never backing down. When we saw him against Hooker, when we even saw him against Khabib in that loss, the guy wasn't backing down. He was being outclassed in the moment, but his mind was telling him not to give up. Now, let's talk about Conor McGregor and his evolution. Conor McGregor also fighting at 145 and then jumping between 155 and 170. This also shows me that it was very similar to Dustin Poirier in the sense that it was a tough weight cut for him as well. And the move to 155 and then sporadically moving to 170 is really helping his game. Now, seeing him online these days, seeing how he's training, he's focusing on the one thing that's evaded his whole career, and that is bringing the same intensity that he has in the first round in all the rounds after. That's the one thing. You can't say that Conor McGregor is not one of the best of all time in the first round. In the first round, this guy comes out and he's ready and he's firing on all cylinders. He's just ready to go. He's one of the best when it comes to that first round. Is he able to take what he has and shift it so he can use it for all of the whole fight? That's the question. And I know everybody says it's cardio issues and all that kind of stuff, that's why he gasses out. It doesn't really look like a gas out, in my opinion. It just looks like the fights that he's in, they're at a high output, but he's also getting thrashed in the moment. Yes, I think it has a little bit to do with the cardio, but I don't think it's fully about that. It's just the fights that he's in. I got to see him put on that masterclass for all of the fights. And that's what he showed me in the Eddie Alvarez fight. The Eddie Alvarez fight, I think, was the peak abilities of Conor McGregor. If you watch that fight, I love to watch that fight. It comes on YouTube and all these things every once in a while. And whenever I watch that fight, I see Conor McGregor. It looks like he's in a different dimension. It looks like he's in the Matrix. In that video, Conor was seeing everything. He was able to evade shots, and he was able to put it on Eddie Alvarez. If we can get that Conor McGregor to come in and fight Poirier, I think that Conor McGregor has a really good chance of defeating Dustin Poirier. Now, here's the kind of flip side. And what I mean by that is right now, Conor McGregor is being very polite, if you would say, to Dustin Poirier, even offering to give money to his charity and being very courteous with him at the moment. Now, I think we're about 2 weeks out from this fight. And if Conor McGregor just flips the switch and just all of a sudden starts ragging on Dustin Poirier the way that he's done with his opponents in the past, then we might see the old fight. The first fight that actually happened. That's what happened in that fight, in my opinion. I think that Dustin Poirier got too caught up in the situation, and he just tried going after Conor McGregor. Mind you, in the first fight, I think a lot of people forget, and I think a lot of people should rewatch that fight, because Dustin Poirier was hitting Conor McGregor with some clean shots, and he was really getting at Conor. It wasn't a super easy win like everybody would say. Even though it did end really early, it wasn't that easy for Conor McGregor. It was a really tough fight. Mind you, the casual fans, like the ones that you see on ESPN and Sports Center and all these things, they're just saying that this fight is going to be a replay of the first one. They're going to think that the second one is going to be just a replay of the first one. That is not the case. These two fighters have evolved. They're both completely different fighters, in the sense that They've gained so much knowledge. Conor's gone on to do so many great things. Dustin has gone on to do so many amazing things. And they've all accumulated all of that experience. Now, let's talk about the experience that these two have gained. Let's first talk about Dustin Poirier. Dustin Poirier's last fight was with Dan Hooker. It was an amazing fight. Some people were saying that it was fight of the year, back and forth. And at the time, I rewatched a little bit of that fight. And at the time, it was crazy because it was one of the first fights that was done in Vegas at the Apex. And it was nuts because people didn't know how to react in that situation. And it was eerily quiet in that arena. Go back and watch that fight. I think it's on YouTube. The UFC just posted it. And in that fight, it was so quiet. And you could hear everything. And for them to put on a show like that in that eerie of a situation was incredible. Anyways, so Dan Hooker put it on Dustin Poirier, but Dustin Poirier came out with the win. A unanimous decision win where both fighters exited not looking like the same people. Before that, Khabib Nurmagomedov rear naked choked Dustin Poirier in a fight that was really rough for Dustin Poirier. It was a really hard fight for him. And Khabib just put it on him in Abu Dhabi in front of all of his fans. And before that, a lot of people forget that he fought Max Holloway and beat him in a decision win unanimously. It was crazy because at the time, everybody thought that Max at the time at 145 was a killer, a straight like he would demolish people. And everybody thought that he would come to 155 and be able to just clean out the division. Maybe he was the one to fight Khabib and beat him. But then that fight never occurred. And what ended up happening was this fight with Dustin Poirier. Dustin Poirier put on a clinic at the time. It was crazy to see because I don't think at the time people didn't know Dustin Poirier to be at the top of the food chain like he is. Now we all see him. He's got like 1.8 followers or something like that. And we see him as a star in that illustrious 155-pound division. But at the time, they were using him as some sort of stepping stone for Max Holloway in the 155-pound division. And it took a lot of guts for Dustin Poirier to beat Max Holloway in that decision win. Now, before that, let's talk about this Eddie Alvarez fight that happened. It was maybe 2 fights after this one. He fought Eddie Alvarez, and it was a no contest because of an illegal knee. So then they fought again, and Eddie Alvarez got TKO'd, and it was in the second round. I mean, it was another one of those new era Dustin Poirier fights. I think there's 2 classifications that we need to make. Is that the first era of Dustin Poirier was the fighter that we saw against Conor McGregor. And now we see Dustin Poirier use all of his knowledge and abilities that he's gained and just overall grit and determination that he has to defeat all of these fighters in a spectacular fashion, man. He's an exciting fighter. Dustin Poirier is. And then lastly, the one that I'm just going to talk about is Justin Gaethje. He defeated Justin Gaethje with TKO punches, and it was against the fence. And that shows you how elite this guy is. This is the same Justin Gaethje who went on that run and fought Khabib, and unfortunately he lost. I mean, unfortunately to him, fortunately to Khabib, but he lost in that situation. But you can't take away the fact that this guy, Justin Gaethje, was on a run, and before that run, Dustin Poirier defeated him with TKO punches. This is a guy with strong hands, improved boxing. I think that Justin Gaethje, once he kind of shifted from his moniker of the highlight to just being a precision puncher like he is now, became a lot more dangerous. And at that time, right before that switch, he fought Dustin Poirier, and Dustin Poirier defeated him, which shows you how amazing this guy is. And then you just go through all of his whole resume, and it's just a bunch of great wins against some amazing fighters. He's got he's had 33 contests, and he's had 26 wins and 6 losses. That doesn't reflect the caliber of fighters that he's been fighting. He's always been fighting top of the food chain type people. And it's going to be a great test against Conor McGregor, who, let's talk about him now. Conor McGregor, he's got 26 fights, 22 wins, 4 losses. And he's such a star that most people could just name off his losses because he's got so many great wins. So we all know the fight with Donald Cerrone that he had. A lot of people are saying that that fight didn't show us much. But the one thing it did show us in the 40 seconds that we saw is Conor McGregor, first of all, like I said before, is the pound for pound greatest in the first round. He's the scariest person that you'll ever see in a first round. The other thing that it showed us was that he still has that killer instinct, and he still has that willingness to just hit the pedal to the metal and just go after you. In all of the situations, right when he grabbed him, he was doing those shoulder strikes, those unorthodox shoulder strikes. Then he tried going for that head kick because he thought Donald Cerrone was going to get the all-time record or something off of him. He went for that head kick, which really dazed and confused Donald Cerrone. And then he just went for the kill. That fight, I think, showed us a lot when it comes to those points that I mentioned. The other thing that it showed us is this newfound kind of niceness that Conor McGregor is presenting. He's not going after anybody. At the time, at the beginning of the fight, he wasn't going after anybody. He wasn't saying anything wrong about Donald Cerrone. He just said that he wanted to fight, and this is just going to be a contest. But then at the end of that fight, in that post-fight interview with Joe Rogan, we saw that flip. where Conor McGregor started calling out everybody. He called out, you name it, he called them out. And we saw the flip of the switch again. So who knows where Conor McGregor's at? I know at the beginning of this fight with Dustin Poirier, right now we're in the situation where Conor is being very nice to Dustin Poirier, but I think he could flip at any point because we still got a good amount of time left. So after that fight, he lost to Khabib Nurmagomedov. Now in the Khabib fight, Conor McGregor, I think, did the best that we've seen against Khabib. And that's anybody that's fought him. We saw Justin Gaethje fight Khabib, and he lost. And we all thought at the time that his wrestling background would help him. We all thought that his striking abilities would help him. We thought that overall he would be the fighter that defeats Khabib Nurmagomedov. But that wasn't the case. Khabib did that amazing triangle choke on Justin Gaethje and ended it just as quickly as he's ended any other fights. But when he faced Conor McGregor, in a couple of those rounds, Conor looked like he was coming back, especially in that third round. That first round, it looked scary for Khabib as well because, like I've mentioned so many times, this guy is one of the most scariest first round fighters in the UFC. But even in that third round, Conor McGregor switched gears and it looked like he was coming back. Even the wrestling that he displayed, the little bit, like that one time that he got up after Khabib took him down, it showed us that Conor McGregor doesn't have underrated anything. Like he's obviously his striking is so spectacular that I think it makes everything else on the it puts everything else on the back burner. It's not that his wrestling or his jiu-jitsu or anything is subpar for the UFC. I think that his main skill set, which is striking, is just so much better than everything else. Like in terms of, it's just so great that it makes everything else look a little bit less. So before that fight, we saw him fight Eddie Alvarez. I mean, we talked about that. That was a spectacular win. It showed us a lot, especially in that moment. The first fight in New York. I mean, it was his first fight in New York. And he became the first double champ in UFC history, holding them at the same time. So this guy is not scared of the moment. This guy will never be scared of the moment. I don't know what it is, but whenever this guy fights Conor McGregor, he lives to be in that moment. He needs to be in that moment. Conor McGregor is one of the most special athletes that we've had in the UFC, period. It's not because of the striking ability. It's not because of his, Mike's, his ability on the mic. It's because the fact is that whenever you put this guy in the moment, the most scariest moment, the time where everybody kind of shrivels up, this guy thrives in those moments. And the last fight that I'm going to talk about, because the fight after that, we all know it was Jose Aldo. And it was that 13-second KO, the amazing one, that he got the 145-pound belt. But before or after that fight, he fought Nate Diaz twice. First time he lost, he got submitted with a rear naked choke. Second time, he won by majority decision. That fight, I mean, it showed a lot of character as well. The thing is that Nate Diaz was not regarded ever as one of the top guys. It was a crazy matchup in the fact that Nate Diaz is just so much bigger than Conor McGregor. He's so much bigger. His skills are in the areas that are not Conor McGregor's strong suit, which is his jiu-jitsu. I mean, Nate Diaz's boxing with his coach and all that, with his brother as well, is top of the food chain type stuff. But his jiu-jitsu is just amazing. So the thing is, it was a very tough test for Conor McGregor. And for him to come back after that fight and say, yes, I want to redo that one. I'm not scared of this guy. I want to redo this fight. Shows a lot about Conor McGregor. Because the fact is that some fighters would have been like, okay, I need another fight. I'm not going to say anybody's scared after they lose like that. It's just that right away, he said, I want to fight this guy. And at the time, if you remember, Nate Diaz became a megastar. He was on all these news stations and, E! Entertainment. I remember that interview. He was all over the place. And everybody thought that this was the guy that showed us how to defeat Conor McGregor. But then, showed us the path to defeat Conor McGregor. Because think about it. This guy, the last time Conor McGregor lost was against Joseph Duffy in 2010. And that wasn't that was a long time ago. So then he came back and won all these fights, and he entered the UFC and won all these fights. He won a bunch of fights in Cage Warriors as well. And then we found out, and then Nate Diaz beat him. It's so funny how we write off fighters right away. It's funny because it's even happening to Conor McGregor. A lot of people are just jumping off his bandwagon just because he lost a couple times to the best of the best. And the other time, he went back and defeated Nate Diaz. Now, who knows what happens in that trilogy? But this guy is still special. You can't write him off. We got to see what he does in this Dustin Poirier fight, which is why I think this fight is so special. This is the reason why this fight needs to happen, because these are two people that are evolved and became two totally different fighters. So we talked about all that. Let's talk about the card real quick, because I think there's an interesting thing that's going on here. So on Saturday, January 23rd, 2021 in Abu Dhabi, we're getting Poirier versus McGregor. First of all, Dustin Poirier is number 2 in the division, and then Conor McGregor is number 4 in the division, which I think is interesting as well because we haven't seen Conor McGregor come out in a walkout first in a little while. We saw it in the Khabib fight, but it's just weird to see. That's just one of my MMA nerd facts things. I just find those things really interesting. But I think the interesting thing here is Dan Hooker and Michael Chandler are fighting right before them. Now, God forbid anything happens to Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor. But are these two ready to fight one of these two guys? I mean, Dustin Poirier and Dan Hooker already fought. So I think if the UFC had to figure out who Dustin Poirier would fight, it would be Michael Chandler. But then he jumps. But see, here's the back and forth kind of nature of this sport. But the thing is that Michael Chandler was a substitution for Khabib Nurmagomedov and Justin Gaethje. So does that bring him up a level? Even though he's unranked at the moment, we still believe because of the UFC's decision that he is at the top of the food chain. I mean, if Conor McGregor had to fight one of them, I think the better matchup for him would be Michael Chandler. He's a wrestler, but he's not the same type of wrestler that Khabib Nurmagomedov is. He's a wrestler whose nickname is like Mini Mike Tyson. So he likes to use his hands. I mean, Dan Hooker is the tallest person in this division. I saw an interview with Michael Chandler talking about the fact is that he feels like he matches up better with everybody else in the division except for Dan Hooker because of his height. And I think that affects a lot of fighters. I talked about this before in a previous podcast, but the fact is that Dan Hooker is super underrated. And the fact is that this guy trains with Adesanya. And when you train with a guy who is fighting for the 205 belt and has plans to fight for heavyweight, you should be a big guy yourself. And I don't know how, but this guy makes 155. It makes sense, actually, because if you look at his body, it's long, but he's not like the tallest, if you get what I mean, even though he's the tallest in the division. But it's not like he's super tall. It's not like he could pack on a bunch of pounds and then fight at a different weight class. I mean, he could do the DC thing, but you get what I mean. He's just perfectly made for fighting. Because I've talked about this before in previous podcasts again, but the ideal body type for fighting is, in my opinion, not the one who's the most jacked and looks like a football player. It's not the one who is kind of stout and whatever. I think, well, first of all, it depends on who you are and how you use your attributes, because there's outliers in every case. But the ones that are like really long and have long arms and limbs, look at John Jones, for example. He's got super long reach. It's like a crazy reach that this guy has. And it's the same thing with Dan Hooker. He's got that crazy reach. So I just wanted to chat about the possibilities, because we're so far out. We've seen it so many times, especially when it comes to Conor McGregor's career, is that if the fight doesn't happen, he's willing to fight someone else. And we can see that there's a backup already in place on the card. I'm going to do another recap, I'm sure, of the whole card itself when we get closer, because this is such a big card. I think we got to talk about this in multiple podcasts, but let's just quickly look at the card, because after reviewing it, I was like, wow, there's a bunch of fun fights on this card. We got Jessica Evil Eye versus Joanne Calderwood. That's going to be a fun fight. After that, or before that, we have Khalil Roundtree, which he's always fun to fight, especially will he go back to using his Muay Thai style that he developed. And because that was super fun, super exciting, and it was really interesting to see how someone can just switch all of their habits and then turn into a different kind of fighter. I mean, Khalil Roundtree never fought like that before. It was just recently, after coming back from Thailand, he started fighting like a Muay Thai fighter. Like, it was crazy. Like, he was keeping his leg real loose, his front lead leg, it was real loose. I mean, he was, his even stance was completely Muay Thai. And it's crazy to see all those habits. Like, if you play basketball, you have a shooting form. It's like taking your shooting form and switching it in the middle of your career. It's one of the hardest things that you can do. Getting out of that habit, because at the end of the day, if you're a basketball player, if you're an MMA fighter, if you're whatever, there's certain habits that you have that linger with you for the rest of your life. It's like, what do you do in the flinch situations? When you got to make that last buzzer beater shot, do you revert back to your old shooting form, or do you go back, or do you use your new fundamentals that are actually better? It's the same thing that we've seen in fighters in the past, like DC. He always kind of slips to the right. He always moves his head to the right. And we saw what happened when John Jones took advantage of that and hit him with that crazy shot while he was ducking his head to the right. Those are habits that are formed since you were a kid. So that's why I think it's so amazing when Khalil Roundtree came out and he just stuck to that Muay Thai style. Then we got Amanda Ribas fighting, which is she's always fun to watch. And we got the Canadian boy Hakeem Dawodu versus Shane Burgos. That's an underrated fight, and it's at the beginning of the card. So I mean, like, that's going to be a fun fight. Hakeem Dawodu coming from that last fight where he beat all odds and defeated a fighter who everybody thought was going to destroy him, because he does come from that Khabib Nurmagomedov camp. But Hakeem Dawodu, super underrated, and I think he might be the key to Canada. I think he might be the person that could bring Canadian MMA back. Canadian MMA is still very strong, but the fact is that we need someone to hoist the flag, if you will. Be the person that is the amazing striker who, that Hakeem Dawodu is. I'm a big fan of his, and I think he could be the key because he's so spectacular in his style. George St. Pierre was something else because he was just a monster in every aspect of the sport. But Hakeem Dawodu is so spectacular in his striking, and he just looks mean, just like his nickname says. So I'm super excited. Whenever I see him fight, I got to watch it. I'm a major fan of his. And I think that's it. I think that's all we're going to talk about for this podcast. But I mean, we're going to talk about this fight card for a little while. We got some fights before that as well. That's happening on Tuesday and one before that. But this is the major one. Conor McGregor is coming back. So I wanted to say thank you for taking the time. Thank you for listening to this podcast. It means a lot taking the time out of your day to listen to me talk about fights. But I really appreciate it. If you guys could like, subscribe, do all the 5 stars on the different podcast platforms, that would be really appreciated. And I'll talk to you guys soon. This has been the Body Punch Podcast. My name is Naz. Bye.